Hi, this is Congressman Guy Reschenthaler, and you're listening to Get Going with Guy, a conservative's guide to cutting through the propaganda of the woke left in the mainstream media, a podcast where hypocrisy has no home. All right, guys, you know the drill, bluff. Bottom line up front, here's the bluff. China is the number one threat to democracy and freedom. That's irrefutable. In Republican leadership in the House, we know this. That's why Leader Kevin McCarthy put together the China Task Force to address the emerging threat from China. Democrats had the opportunity to join this committee. It was supposed to be bipartisan, but sadly, they walked away. We'll get to that. Just so you know, this is part one in a two-part series. Today, we're going to focus on what the China Task Force is. On Friday, part two, we're going to focus on what the China Task Force did and what we accomplished. All right, let's just contextualize everything that's going on with CTF. Leader Kevin McCarthy, my good friend, launched the CTF. It was chaired by another one of my good friends, Mike McCall of Texas. And what we wanted to do is we wanted to take a cross-jurisdictional approach to dealing with all the threats coming from China. Like I said, this was originally designed to be bipartisan. We wanted Democrats to join us, but the Democrats strung along Kevin McCarthy. They strung along Republicans for months. Now, often I think two things. Number one, what does the Chinese Communist Party have on the Democrats? It's got to be something big because the Democrats will not do anything to criticize or hold China accountable. I also think of what we could have done had we actually started the task force in a bipartisan manner months before it actually started when Kevin McCarthy wanted to launch it. What could we have done with that task force to get to the bottom of the deadly pandemic that came from China? Could lives have been saved? We'll never know because the Democrats just drug their feet. But we do know this. We know that China has been engaged in horrible human rights abuses. Just look at what they're doing to the Uyghur population in Western China. Just look at all the mounting evidence this pandemic, COVID-19, arose and originated from a lab in Wuhan. Look at the geopolitical aggression that you're seeing from China. Look at how they violated international agreements and conquered the independent city-state of Hong Kong. Look at how they've militarized around Taiwan and how they're doing flyovers of the free and independent nation of Taiwan. If you look at all this, it's very clear that China needs to be held to account, and there needs to be a force that can withstand and confront China moving forward. That force is going to be the United States and our allies. I wish the Democrats would realize this and get on board and help Republicans advance freedom and democracy around the world. But with that said, let's look at the nuts and bolts of the China Task Force. We had 16 members on the task force. 11 committees were represented on that task force because we wanted to have a holistic approach at dealing with what's really the multifaceted threats that's coming from China. We then took the 16 members. Every member had two subcommittee assignments. We called these pillars. And we had 6 pillars, like I said. Number one was ideological competition. What that focused on was such issues as Confucius Institutes, where the Chinese go in and they set up Confucius Institutes in high schools, colleges, and universities to indoctrinate students in communist thinking. We also had one on supply chain. One area that I was very focused on was with the supply chain was that 80% of our rare earth elements are controlled now by China. That's a problem. We also had another subcommittee, we called them pillars, defense. I was on defense. One startling thing, the Chinese Navy has now has more ships than the US Navy. Not only is that startling, it's also startling when you think that the US Navy has to cover all the water, right? We've got to be on every single ocean. The Chinese predominantly are focused on the Pacific, so that makes that number even more alarming. All right, we also had the pillar of technology. That focused largely on 5G and Huawei and how the Chinese use it as a backdoor to control developing nations and to spy and do data collection on the free world. The 5th pillar, I was also on this, was economics and energy. A standard truth to this is the less energy we produce in the United States, the more dependent we are and the more dependent our allies are on nefarious actors like China and Russia. And then lastly, we had competitiveness. This focused largely on intellectual property and China stealing intellectual property to get an advantage over the United States and other developed nations. All right, that's the nuts and bolts. You guys now know what the China Task Force is. next segment, part 2, which airs on Friday, we're going to focus on what we did. All right, if you like this content, guys, you got to subscribe, because I've taken such a hawkish position on China that upsets the CCP and, by extension, the big tech oligarchs that are controlled in large part by the Chinese communists. So please subscribe, please rate, please like this content, this podcast, if you like this content. All right, that's it for today, gang. I'll see you next time. And as always, just call me Guy.